spent some time on this somewhat spring day. Feel free to share that. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Rick to get us started. He's going to introduce the speakers we have here tonight from the city of Shoreline. We will then discuss very briefly what changes have been made to the charter, make sure we can all live with that and kind of move forward with that. And then we'll have presentations tonight from police, planning and community development, and then economic development. And we will take a short break in there as well. So with that, Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all again. And we're fortunate to be joined for this evening's group of presentations by Chief Ryan Abbott that will cover the police department for the city of Shoreline. And then for our planning and community development department, we have Rachel Markle, our PCD director. We have Ray Althouse, our building inspector. We have Andrew Bauer, our planning manager, and we have Jared Lewis, our permit services manager. So the four of them are going to tag team the PCD presentation. And then bringing up the rear of the meeting, at least the full agenda that we have for the 2 hours set up, is a really great presentation from Nate Dahm, our economic development manager. So yeah, a lot in store for tonight.
And we also, Rick had sent out a message earlier today that we are also adding the optional 30-minute at the end to answer any questions that people might have. We know that our 10-year financial sustainability model is complex. There have been great questions coming in. So please feel free, we can walk through that in detail and make sure that you have an understanding as we move forward. And the reason we were originally intending to do that at meeting 3 or 4, but the reason we're going to do it tonight is because I accepted with quite mixed emotions Rick's resignation. So this will be Rick's last meeting with us before he leaves to take a promotional opportunity with the city of Riverside, California, and move back to his home state of California. So we are very sad to see him go, but we wanted to make sure he actually was with the development of that financial sustainability model since the beginning. And so while Christy and I are both well versed in it, he's the expert, and we wanted to give you the opportunity to hear from him tonight and get your questions answered. So without that, we'll turn it back and get things rolling.
And that last session, we will be recording that. So if you are interested but not available, there'll be an opportunity to listen to that as well. All right, so let's discuss the charter. I know, Rick, you had some comments and feedback on that since our last meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Allegra. So just bringing it up on the screen, there were a couple of comments that were factored in to the draft charter. One requesting that we added a table showing the June to June percentage change of the CPIU that affected the current levy lid lift that expires at the end of 2022. So you can see what those are there. And then talking about there was a extra space. Other than that, it looked like most of the comments from folks agreed with a lot of the ground rules and the roles and responsibilities that were laid out in the charter. And so with that, just wanted to turn over some time to the committee to see how everyone feels about the charter, if you're generally in agreement with it, or if there were any other proposed changes.
And I think here we're not going to take sort of a formal vote, but if you're kind of good with it as is, you could give the thumbs up reaction. If you still have some questions or suggestions, please let us, please raise your hand or come off mute now. But we're now sort of 2 meetings into our 6-meeting series, so hoping to move ahead with the charter. Thanks. I see some thumbs up. And
can you stop sharing so we can see all the thumbs up?
Great. And then Jim, I saw Lincoln's thumbs up earlier. Mary Ellen, great. All right. Is there anyone that still has any questions or suggestions that they wanted to share? All right. I think we're,
I think Robin
Well,
has
can
her
I-
hand up.
yep. Yeah.
And Lisa?
Lisa.
Is it my turn?
Oh, sir, Robin, you go ahead and then I'll go to Lisa.
2 weeks ago, when we began talking about the charter, John Thelke asked a question that I just wanted some clarification on this. I think the question he asked was about committee members talking with each other or being able to kind of caucus independently of the committee. And I don't know if John would respond to that, but I was curious about the purpose of that, why we would do that. And looking at our faces here, I don't know who I would get together with to talk about what's going on. So I just wanted a little clarification on that.
My comment was only if we were going to share information, how we would do it. And apparently we settled on anything we had to would go through Rick and that he would distribute that to the group. So I really wasn't anticipating that we would meet outside of this, but simply if we had messages to share, items to share, how we would do that.
Well, thank you. That sounds perfectly right to me. And I may have not understood it completely, but I do understand what you just said. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks
So
for
one
asking,
of the
Robin.
ground rules, number 7, says that if a member must miss a meeting, they may ask a fellow member to represent their interests and positions at that meeting and are responsible for reviewing the recording of that meeting. The member may also submit written comments that will be distributed to the
Right.
others.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that would preclude any of you from talking out to each other about these topics outside of these meetings.
But we're not, there's no intention for us to be forming little small coalitions outside of the meetings.
I wouldn't necessarily think so.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Lisa, you had a hand up earlier.
Yes, thank you. So I actually have 2 questions. First of all, when I read earlier that there was going to be an additional 30 minutes
Mhm.
of time tacked on to tonight, I have a commitment and I'm
Mhm.
not able to be part of that. So I'm concerned about if we're functioning as a committee, if I'm going to miss 30 minutes of significant discussion, if that's going to be videotaped or something so that I can catch up, I'm concerned
Yes.
about that. And then the second question I had related to just, first of all, whoever on the committee suggested that table that shows the percentage of the increases in terms of the levies being tied to CPI and what the CPI fluctuations have been, I think that's brilliant. So thank you for doing that. And there are obviously, as we see from that insert then, there are significant financial differences from year to year because of that. So that relates in part to the question I had, which was if all of you Shoreline residents will recall when we had a vote a few years ago about the Shoreline area pool and whether or not to have financing for a new swimming pool and with a senior center built around it, et cetera. That went to a very specific vote and it did not get enough votes to pass. So the question I had is when we consider as a group the idea of the levy lid lift for a block of years, are you going to provide us with background information about what the levy lid lift piece of the pie actually goes to in terms of city functions? Because we obviously have separate voting for our school systems and for funding for our schools. We have separate voting for certain types of projects such as swimming pools and things like that. So if we're to truly understand what the financial need is for the type of decision we're being asked to provide advice on, I think we'd need to know more about how those decisions get made and what's in that piece of the pie as opposed to what's outside of it.
And I would say that yes, at meeting 3, the plan is that we'll start to have that conversation to ground you a little bit more deeply into exactly what the levy lift has covered in the past and what it could potentially cover going forward. So that will be part of a future conversation. And to your first question, we will be taping and recording the extra 30-minute because we recognize that members may have a conflict. So that way people could watch it at their own leisure to see. And we'll also cover that again at meeting 3, just at a higher level. Hopefully it will be just a refresher since people will be more grounded in it. Good questions. Thank you.
So,
Yeah, Rob.
so Sarah, maybe at the 3rd meeting, will you step us through the difference between a bond measure and a levy lift? Because
Yes.
I think that would help Lisa, that would clarify some things and the whole subject of bond measures versus levies, how they go on the ballot and so on and so forth.
Yep, we're gonna cover revenue sources in much more detail, and I think we will get to that. So,
Thank you.
and we have a issue paper that we did for council recently that we'll use as sort of a foundation for that and share that with you as well. But there more to come.
Yeah, we're kind of grounding in the foundation of what are the services that are currently covered with the levy lift so that you have that understanding going into it. And then we'll get more into the mechanics of, okay, so then what does that pay for? How does that, what's the impact with the total budget and more of those mechanics. So any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll plan to move ahead with the charter as written. Looks like we're good there. Okay, thanks for the shaking heads. It's good to get some some confirmation at the screen. All right, well, with that, I think Captain Abbott, I believe I will be turning it over to you next.
Thank you, Allegra. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and speak with all of you and talk to you all about the police department. I'll show you my PowerPoint presentation, and obviously there are some questions that I got beforehand that I can answer. And then if there's any additional questions, please don't hesitate to ask them and I will do my best. If I don't know an answer, I'll make sure that I get it to you. A little bit about me before I start. I've been with the King County Sheriff's Office for 16 years. I started out in the South End where I've worked patrol for quite a while. I was promoted to sergeant when I worked at a CTAC in Burien. And then I became the public information officer for the King County Sheriff's Office. I did that for 3 years. Gave me more experience than I ever imagined was even possible in this career path. And I actually had a really good time doing it. And I was promoted to captain and I was assigned to Shoreline. And I was so lucky to come out here. It has been an amazing time. Great people that live here, great people that work for the city. And I've really enjoyed my time. Chief Ledford, who was in my spot before, was promoted to a division chief for the Sheriff's Office. And I was selected as the interim chief for Shoreline. So with that, it's almost coming up on almost 2 years in Shoreline now. And I've, like I said, really enjoyed my time. So let me show you my screen. Maybe, oh, here it is. Everybody can see my presentation there. And move this out of the way so I can actually see it. All right, so Shoreline Police Department, leadership, integrity, service, and teamwork. Those are our standards for the King County Sheriff's Office, and they go into everything that we do, including the city of Shoreline. Okay, so a little bit about our police department. We have 52, we call them FTEs, full-time equivalent positions in the city. Obviously, there's the chief. We have 2 captains. We have one that's in charge of the administrative side and one that's in charge of the patrol operations side. So on the administrative side, we have our 2 people that work up at the front desk that do amazing work for us. We have they call them a set sergeant, special emphasis team. So they're undercover detectives. We have a set detective sergeant as well as 4 detectives. And then we have a detective sergeant who's in charge of our, they're called burglary larceny detectives. We have 4 detectives that work in that unit, and they do all of our follow-up work to all the cases that come in, from domestic violence to burglaries to car prowls, anything that needs follow-up work, that's what this unit does. We have 1 crime prevention officer, Paula Keelan. She's amazing. She has a lot of specialized training, and that's one of the great parts about living in the city is we have somebody available that's able to come out, and you can call her and she'll come out and provide crime prevention advice, look at your house, kind of look over everything, talk about lighting and cameras and everything else. We have Dahlia, who's our community service officer, and she does amazing work for us. We have 5 patrol sergeants and 1 traffic sergeant. So technically 6 patrol sergeants, and that they cover all 3 shifts. So we have day shift, swing shift, and graveyard. So 25 patrol officers or deputies and 5 traffic deputies. We also have a canine and his handler, Deputy Dallin. He works kind of a swing shift, graveyard shift. And then his dog, who's out now as well. Really good looking dog and very good at tracking. We had a school resource officer. No longer do we have one. The school board put a hold on that, so you don't see them on our sheet here because of that. And then we see all these positions. That doesn't necessarily mean that those positions are filled. Us, along with all the other police departments in the state of Washington, are really struggling to get good qualified officers. So we're doing a ton of work to do a lot of recruiting, and we are down. We have no traffic officers right now in the city at all. We had to put everybody on to answer 911 calls. So they're all doing patrol. And obviously that's the most important part, is that we're able to get out and answer 911 calls when people need help. So that's a little bit about our organizational chart, and something we'll talk a little bit more about the contracting model. And I'm sure some of you are wondering what that is, and some of you might be familiar with it. But because we contract with the King County Sheriff's Office, it allows us to have a lot more things that are we have a helicopter, we have all sorts of different areas and expertise that's able to come in and help us as part of that contract. And we'll talk more about it here in just a minute. We'll go to the next slide. So this is a cost comparison, and this is not from 2020. The last cost comparison that was done was 2017. And they're actually working on a new one right now. So as soon as we get that one, I asked them a couple of weeks ago and they said they're working on it. So I'd love to be able to provide a new one to everybody once we get when that's going to occur. But I'm glad to send out the 2017 cost comparison so everybody here can kind of understand what we're looking at. But if you look here, this is just some of the cities around the area. A lot of the police budgets that are higher have their own police department. And that's I guess the good part about contracting is that you can see that Shoreline is on here. And then also, let's see, okay, so we are the only one on here that's contracted with the Sheriff's Office. We have another one that shows Burien as well. But for our population, our amount of officers is significantly less that we pay the people that live in the city for police services. Don't get me wrong, it's still a lot of money for police services, but looking at some of the other numbers are a lot more substantial and a lot higher. And again, with the contract, we get a dispatch center, so we don't have to have our own. King County Sheriff's Office has a dispatch center. We have all of our major crimes detectives. So anytime there's a shooting or homicide or anything with a violent crime, we have major crimes detectives with all the specialized training. They're actually really amazing. They respond to the calls for us after we've secured the scene. We have special assault unit detectives. We have major accident and reconstruction detectives that respond when there's traffic collisions that are critical injuries or fatalities. We have a SWAT team. We have Guardian 1 helicopter. We have a Marine unit. So there's all these different, I guess, divisions that are part of this, as well as we have our HR department handles everything. We have evidence storage. The 2023-2024 budget, we are going to have body cams. It's going on the budget, and everybody's really in favor of it. All of the officers really want them. So the hope is that we can get body cams for every patrol officer, and the cost continues to be what it is because of our contracting model. So that's the real positive part. And that's why we have 14 contract cities. So there's a lot of cities. Our biggest contracts, Shoreline, SeaTac, and Burien. Those are our biggest and busiest contracts. And then we also have Metro Transit and Sound Transit that cover a pretty large area as well.
So Chief, what is sworn/1000?
Let me look over here, sorry. So sworn, so what that's talking about is sworn officer per 1,000, a population of 1,000. So for every officer that's out there, so they're saying just about an officer for every 1,000 people that live in the city. And we try to keep it about 1 per 1,000. That's the kind of the formula that you try to go for. And you could see some of the other ones like Seattle is 2 for every 1,000 people that live in the city. But you try to keep it at 1 for every 1,000. And I don't know the newest updated numbers, but we're right around 1. So with City of Seattle, they have 2 officers per 1,000, and Redmond about an officer and a half. So it's kind of a formula that they use.
Chief, but can I clarify that our number doesn't include all of those additional resources that are at our disposal, but we don't have to carry the day-to-day overhead of them. So if you put them in, our number probably would be a little higher if you averaged our percentage of those positions to Shoreline, because I think these are just our dedicated officers that we count.
Yep. None of the specialty units are included. Good
And
point.
can you just remind people the year from this data?
Yeah, this data right here, hold on just a second. So they do it every 2 years, 2015, 2017. I believe this is the 2017, but let me check when I get done here and I'll make sure. If it's not the 2017 and it's the 2015, I will send you the 2017. We do not have 2019 yet, or 2021 for that matter. So like I said, they're a little bit behind on their data numbers. But hopeful that we can get those soon. Anything else on that one before I move on? Sorry.
There was one clarification on whether the 0.97 per 1,000 is current. I think I heard you say it's about 1, so it sounds like it's similar, but if you could just clarify that.
Yeah, and I haven't seen the newest number, but that's, I think, unless Sarah Rick has something else on that, I haven't seen the newest.
I think it is about 1 of that we are authorized, but because of vacancies, it is lower because of the vacancies, but for the actual contracted positions.
Excuse me, but you're working on possibly 2019, but isn't the annual budget of the city known for what and how the police budget, it might be put into that budget, and we know the population? So it seems to me to be pretty straightforward to just get the current numbers, wouldn't it?
Oh, sorry, I thought it was on mute. I can get the numbers for Shoreline. I can't get the numbers for all the other cities. And that's what our contracting unit is supposed to be getting together and providing that information. I have Christina put together another, I'm just gonna jump away from the screen for just a second here, and I will put it on the screen. Okay, hold on, let me find out how I bring you guys back. So this is another way to look at it, and this is, everybody can see this Excel spreadsheet that I brought up. This is numbers as of now and where we're at because of our vacancies. We're at 12 vacancies in the city and for officers. And so you can see our number dropped to 0.86. Now this is some of the local areas and local departments, Linwood, Edmonds, Bothell. This doesn't have the overall, but it has the per capita police spending, officers per 1,000. You can see Burien and Shoreline are right on. We are both contracts of the sheriff's office. So we have a formula that our contracting unit puts together. And each contract has to hold a certain number of vacancies so that we can run the entire department. And the hope is it's still going to be a while to get our recruiting numbers back up. But in the next 2 to 3 years, we're hopeful to be back to where we're supposed to be at with our recruiting numbers. So this is kind of the overall look at things as of right now. And these numbers are this year, 2021. And I will make sure that you all get this along with the 2017 cost comparison. It's kind of it's a little file, and I can send that to Rick, and we can make sure that all of you get it, or Sarah, or whoever can get it to everybody. So you guys can look through those numbers as well.
Rick, this is Jim. Question for you. The 2020 financial statement showed public safety at 16.6 million. Is it police plus other stuff, or just police department in that number?
Yeah, police plus jail services. So we contract with SCORE Jail and King County Jail, but most of our stuff is at SCORE. And so that contract number is also in there.
We don't know what SCORE is.
Oh, sorry. Me and my acronyms. So you get the police, they start talking in all sorts of mumbo jumbo. SCORE is the jail that is located in Des Moines, SeaTac on the border, that we book all of our misdemeanor crimes into. So anybody that we arrest out of the city of Shoreline for a misdemeanor crime, we drive them down to the SCORE jail, it's South Correctional Entity, and that's where we leave them. The King County Jail in Seattle takes all of our felony bookings, and often you'll hear it referred to as KCJ, King County Jail. So that's where we book all of our felony bookings. And so we have contracts with both of those so that we can put people into those different locations. And it says on this one, it says Shoreline contracts out jail and court services. And Linwood and Kirkland have their own jails and their own courts. So those numbers are higher in those areas because of that as well.
Ryan, I'm tracking a few questions in the chat, but I think maybe we'll have you get through your presentation, and then we can come back to some of the larger kind of system operational questions.
Perfect, because I can't see them for some reason. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint here in just a second. Okay, back in business. Let's move on to, oops, okay. So this is I guess the outcome of the survey that's sent out by the city of Shoreline. And I just wanted everybody to kind of get an overall view of what we're looking with. And this is the overall satisfaction with police. And it talks about the percentages of what people feel about the city of Shoreline, the police services that they're getting from our officers on a day-to-day basis. And it was interesting because it depended on how long people had lived in Shoreline. So the people that had lived in Shoreline longer rated the police services higher. The people who lived in Shoreline not as long rated police services a little bit lower. So there's all sorts of different ways to kind of dissect all of this information. It was of note in 2018 to now, the overall view of police, or I guess the satisfaction of police, dropped by 8% since 2018. And it could have been a number of things, including a lot of the different really high publicity or tragic events that occurred around the US have changed some of the views of people in the area. And so you can see overall, again, what our point scale is, and people that are either very satisfied or satisfied with police, and then the dissatisfied as well. So it gives us an overall something to look at and something to be aware of, so that, you know, when we look at drug activity, well, unfortunately, the laws have changed. And so that really hamstrings our ability to really focus on going after drug activity when it's not as easy as it used to be to book somebody on that. So traffic has always been a big part of Shoreline. We have a lot of roads, a lot of very busy roads with Aurora and other things. So that's always been something that people really want a lot of is traffic enforcement, and something that the city council really makes a making sure that we're getting and actually paying attention and keeping our traffic accidents down with enforcement action and other things like that. So this will give you all the different kind of ideas and things that we look at to know how our community feels about the police and things that we can improve on. And we're constantly improving on things, and we'll continue to. Okay. This is the Shoreline Patrol Districts, and this is how we split up the city and how our calls are dispatched out and how our officers respond in the different cities that are out there. So some of our busier districts, and we get the most calls in, you know, the Adam 5, Adam 6, it just kind of depends and on where the calls come in at. But this is kind of just giving you an overall view so you can get an idea of what it's like for our officers when they're responding to calls and the different districts that are out there. Okay, Shoreline Patrol, this is the police dispatch calls for services, and this goes up to 2020, and the alternate call handling, and I'll talk about both of those. Dispatch calls for service is you call 911 and you need an officer to respond. This in 2020, we had 14,949. You will notice that a lot of our stats have went down in 2020 when COVID was kind of at a high where a lot of people were at home. It's really interesting to watch, like our burglaries went way down because everybody's home and people aren't going to get their houses broken into when every single person is already at their house. So the calls for service in 2018 looks like they were the highest at 16,567, and then they slowly started going down in 2019 and down to 14,949 in 2020. With that being said, alternate call handling. So when somebody calls 911 and if they had COVID during our COVID time, unless it was an absolute emergency that we needed to be here, we would refer them to online reporting because we didn't want our officers to go and possibly get COVID as well. And then, you know, the whole police department has it. So we had a lot of online reporting that was done, and we were also taking over the phone reports from people. Some of the different departments within the sheriff's office, including unincorporated areas, are big into alternative call handling because of their staffing levels. However, in the city of Shoreline, I feel that our job is to get out and really be out talking to our community, see what we can do to help. So we are really limiting the number. Unless somebody calls and specifically says they want to do online reporting, we're going to respond. We're going to respond to your house and we're going to see what we can do to help. We're going to take the report and see if there's anything else that we can do, because I think it's really important that you have that one-on-one interaction with your police department. So our alternate call handling numbers will never be as high as you will see at some of the other areas that have gone to it. Now, I don't know why in 2017 we had 106 reports. There was a year that we had a big rash of employment security fraud, like a lot. And so those years, the alternate call handling was a lot higher because we were taking phone report after phone report after phone report. I don't think that was the year, but sometimes the numbers fluctuate because of that. Okay, I'm going to move ahead here. Just to give us an idea of the top 10 calls for service that our officers are dispatched to each and every day. And it didn't change. The top 10 calls, looking at it from 2017, 18, and 19. 2019 was the last data that we had in order to do this. There wasn't a very significant change in types of calls that we responded to. I will just go over 2019 and you can look at the other ones and kind of decide what the calls are. If you have any questions about them, I'm happy to answer them after. But suspicious circumstance, we had 1,400 of those calls, 1,465 of those calls, which made up 9%. A suspicious circumstance call could be something like, hey, I see somebody, they don't live in this neighborhood, they look like they're looking underneath a car, and I don't know what they're up to. Meaning maybe it's a catalytic converter theft or something like that, or maybe they're looking to break into a car. We arrive in the area, maybe we contact the person, but we're not able to prove that they're committing a crime. Maybe they're just looking under the car for some reason, or maybe it was, they don't really make sense of what they're doing at the area, but we don't have any reason to hold them there, and they go on their way. So we get a lot of suspicious circumstance calls. We don't know what the call is, and we get dispatched out there. We get there, and more times than not, we change it to, yeah, it was a suspicious circumstance, but ended up being a vehicle theft. Somebody's car was stolen, and that's why they were yelling. So that's how the initial call comes in. Area check, we get a lot of area checks, people that just call in because they see something suspicious, or they see, I think I just saw a missing person. They were walking in this area. So we'll do an area check for that person. And sometimes we'll find them and sometimes we won't. Trespass calls, we get them all the time at businesses. Business owners ask somebody to leave. Maybe they're making a disturbance or refusing to pay for their food, or they've been sleeping inside of a store for 10 hours or something, and they ask the people to leave and they refuse to leave. So they'll call the police, and the police will respond and deal with that trespass. Welfare status or welfare check. That can be, I haven't seen my neighbor for a week and I'm worried about him, or it could be there's a guy laying on the sidewalk and I want to make sure that he or she is okay. And so we'll respond and do a welfare check. Disturbance, noise, loud party. That could be loud music, that could be a loud car, that could be, a lot of times we've been getting complaints at different taverns or bars in the city. And so we'll respond and check and see if we have a noise violation of the city code or not. 911 hang-up calls, those continue to happen quite often, and we respond to every single one. We have to try to make contact with the person that called 911 so we can ensure that they are okay. A lot of times it's kids playing on the phone, but not always. There are some times where people do need help and they called us, or maybe they're having phone issues. So we respond to every 911 hang-up call. Alarm residential, we get a lot of alarm calls, a lot of false alarm calls on houses, and we will respond, check the house to make sure it's secure, leave a little hanger at the house saying, hey, we checked your house, alarm went off, we didn't see any force of entry or anything like that. So just to let them know that their alarm went off at the time. Mental complaints is mental health calls. That can be somebody that's threatening to harm themselves, others, or that's gravely disabled. Somebody that needs our help or needs help at the hospital and something we can't provide for them. And in the city of Shoreline, we're really lucky because, I don't want to talk about it because it's one of my slides, but we'll talk about the radar program, and I promise we'll go back to it. But we have another co-responder model in the city that's very helpful for mental complaint calls. Civil problems just mean exactly that it's an issue. We get a lot of roommates that call. My roommate took my $5 off my thing and I want to prosecute them for theft. Well, they live together and it got stolen from the same area. And so we have to tell them that they have to contact a civil, our civil division that will talk to them about it. It's not a criminal investigation. And then assist other agency. We have a lot of agencies we help all the time. They help us. We have Seattle, we have Edmonds, Lake Forest Park, Washington State Patrol, Child Protective Services, you name it, they will call for assistance. And so showing 500 of those calls overall is how many we deal with throughout the year usually. And again, these numbers fluctuate a tiny bit through each year to year, but for the most part, you'll see that these calls are the same calls you'll see year in and year out. That just depend on where exactly the calls are at, showing up for the top, where they are, how many we're getting compared to how many we're getting last year and this year. So that's kind of the calls for service and a little just rundown of it. Let's go on to the next one. All right, this is police initiated responses, and we call these OnViews as police officers. This is kind of what we call an OnView call. So this is, I'm driving outside and I notice I either do a traffic stop on somebody because I found expired tabs, somebody ran a red light. We got some people that are doing racing and other things like that. If we do a traffic stop, that's self-initiated, something that I found myself, and so I'll go ahead and stop them. Also, we are very aware of some of the people that will have warrants for their arrests in the city, and we recognize those people on site. So if we see them as we're driving down the road, and we see them off the side of the road, we'll pull over, stop them, arrest them for their warrant, and book them in jail. That's an on-view activity. You can see in 2017, we had 14,589, and it's just slowly been declining over the years. And it's most likely going to continue to decline. And, you know, for several reasons, the current climate towards law enforcement, the criticism of law enforcement and the activity. And it's really hard to get officers to go and do self-initiated activity if they feel that if they're doing something wrong, they're going to be, or if they're not doing something wrong, people often think that they are. And so it really makes them hesitant to do anything. And then also there's been a lot of case laws that have changed, or a lot of laws in the state that have changed that have threatened if an officer does something wrong, even if they feel like they did it and, you know, they were trying to do the best that they can do. If it's found to be wrong, they can lose their job or end up in prison. So a lot of our younger officers are very nervous about losing their job, not able to provide for their families. And so they're a lot more cautious than they ever have before. Also part of the OnViews is business checks. So going out, such an important part of our job is just talking to the community, doing the community outreach and getting out and just meeting people. So going to the stores, talking to business owners and seeing what kind of issues are going on in the area. And so those also count in there for our OnView activity. And our officers try to do a lot of that. I really push that. I think that's so important that we know who is doing business in our areas and that we can support them and help them if they need it. So my hope is that the numbers don't continue to trend downward, but they are doing that right now. So we'll have to see when the next numbers come out, what changes on that. On to the next one is police response times. So we have different priorities of calls, and this is kind of color coded by that. The yellow calls is a priority 3. So those are the least of, I won't say importance, but the least of emergent. So it could be last week I noticed that last week my credit card was stolen. I never called, but I just noticed today that my bank statement shows that I have some fraudulent activity on my account. So those take the longest for us to get to because of the simple fact that priority X, priority 1, priority 2 really take precedence over anything else. And there are times we have a lot of calls that are holding because we have a lot of people that are calling and needing help. And so we have to really prioritize them. And we could be out on a call taking a burglary report and somebody calls in a fight. Well, we have to leave the burglary, go to the fight, which is a priority X call. So the average response time is pretty good, 3 minutes and 52 seconds in 2020. You can see in 2019, it was 4 minutes and 56 seconds. In 2018, 3 minutes and 82. So we're looking good for our call response. On priority X, priority 1, 6 minutes and 74 seconds. You can kind of see for yourself, 2019 was 7 minutes and 52 seconds. So we've been getting faster, even on our priority 2 calls, getting faster on those and responding. Really, priority X are always going to be the most important, the most emergent, and calls we need to get to the fastest. So we have a big city, officers get there as quick as they can, but they also need to keep in mind, we have to make sure that the public's safe while we get to that call. So we go as quick as we can, as long as we can be safe about it. But that's kind of our overall response time, looking at it. This is the use of force data that is provided, and this shows 2020 police use of force incidents. And this is kind of an interesting fact when you look at it, because a lot of people will watch the news and think, gosh, the police are using force all the time. And that's not necessarily true. You can see in all of 2020, we were dispatched or on-viewed to 22,690 calls. Of that, 15 times did we actually have to use physical use of force. So you can see that's less than 1% that we're actually having to use force on any type of call that we're responding to, which kind of actually really puts into perspective of how often we're actually using force on calls. Our officers have so much training in crisis intervention, in de-escalation. When we go to calls, they are some of the best around you will see at talking to people, really de-escalating and getting people to just kind of calm down and then talk to us. So we don't ever have to get in that instance where we have to use force. There are times, trust me, where people are high on drugs, or possibly having a mental breakdown, and we just can't get them de-escalated, and they continue to try to fight through it. So there are times we have to use force, but for the most part, our officers do amazing work. And I really feel, and that's kind of another good part about contracting, is all of the extra training that we get through the sheriff's office. all the specialized training. So we go through a ton of it every single year, and we'll continue to go through it. So it's such an important part of this job, because when your adrenaline's going, you go back to your training. And if you don't have the training, we've seen some of the just absolute worst things out there that can happen. So, but I just think this is such an important part to see. Talking about training, I just finished it. A little bit of what we do throughout the year, and we go through training all the time. We do firearms training. We do defensive tactics. We have our emergency driving course, EVOC, which our officers have to go through every other year. We go through TASER training every single year. And we also have de-escalation training that I talked about. And then on top of it, we have a lot of online training that we do. And we can't train defensive tactics. We can't train TASER online, but we can train things like, what did I just take today? My fire extinguisher certification. There's things that are required every single year that we can't miss. And it's about 24 hours worth of training that we do online every year as well, along with everything else. And then our crisis intervention training. And that was such an amazing class when I went through it. I went through the 40-hour class, and a lot of us have went through the 40-hour class. There are some people that have an 8-hour, but the 40-hour class really put everything into perspective and allowed us to do some mock scenes to, I won't say show off, but really showcase the information that we just learned and put it into real life scenarios. And that's a really good part of training for us, is that we're able to do that, to kind of add that extra stress to, if you just take tests on paper, you're never going to get there, but to actually go out and do these type of activities and these type of mock scenes to show what it's really like with actual actors and actresses that maybe have mental health issues, that will come out and show us what somebody like that's going to act like. So it was amazing training. It was a great class. I would do it again in a second. And we're really lucky that we have something like that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the data and crime trends that we've seen. And this is 2020 numbers. So I was able to get the newest numbers that I could find. And we've talked a little bit already about the commission officers per 1,000 residents. I guess we have a 2020 number right there, which is 0.94. And this is what I took off of our yearly Shoreline stats that's provided every year by the sheriff's office. You can see that our homicide numbers were up in 2020, went from 0 in 2019 to 2 in 2020. Hopeful that doesn't go up anymore. Oh, whoops, hold on, went the wrong way. Okay. Our crimes against persons, so those could be assaults and other things, those are slightly up in 2020 to 383. And then our robberies are a problem, and they continue to be a problem. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen on the news our pot shop robberies that we've had going, bank robberies in the area. And it's not just Shoreline, it is all over all the cities around Western Washington. The numbers continue to increase. So we went from 29 and up about 10 in 2020. And again, I haven't seen the numbers yet for 2021, but they are slightly increasing from what I've been told. The hate crime number. So I want to talk a little bit about this, because a lot of people have questions on how did you go from 3 in 2019 to 11 in 2020? It wasn't that we had a ton of hate crime. It's that we did a lot better job of documenting things that were going on. And we did a lot better job of educating the public so that people would call in when things would be going wrong. We made an arrest in, was that 2020, 2021? We made an arrest in 2021 of a hate crime. But most of these are documentation. A lot of them were at the school where people were writing things on the bathroom walls, and sometimes at the park. But we are documenting all these things. It's really important that we document all of these crimes that are coming in so that we know where they're occurring at. And so that's why the number is so much higher. The law is very strict on hate crimes. And they have a special prosecutor who really helps us out when we have an incident that we feel is a hate crime. And he will work with us and work with our detectives and our officers directly, so that they can make sure that they're putting forward a quality case so that somebody can be held accountable. We want everybody to feel welcome in our city and anywhere in the state for that matter. And so that's something that we are very serious about, and something that we really are doing a good job documenting. You won't as drastic increase in 2021, at least the last number that I saw. But until we have those numbers actually set in stone, I don't see it expanding that much. But that was the reason between the two, because I looked through each and every one of them. Shoplifting and other, and somebody had a question about shoplifting, so I want to make sure I answer that question in just a little bit, because it was a great question. But you can see that shoplifting, we call them larcenies, are up. They went from 784 to 1,094, and they continue to go up. And we'll get into why that is when I answer the question. A motor vehicle
Chief
theft.
Abbott, sorry to
Yep.
interrupt. We are running a little bit up against time, so
Oh, I'll be quick. Motor vehicle
Okay.
thefts, we're at 227, quite a significant increase. Weapon law violation as well. We went quite a bit. We're up to 18. So we found a lot of guns on the street. Let's talk about radar, because radar is really important. And radar is response, awareness, de-escalation, and referral. And that is such a great program that we're running, not only in our city, it's Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, Bothell, and Kirkland. And it allows a mental health professional to team up with an officer, and we're able to go to calls in a co-responder model and help people. We're able to give them that follow-up piece that they need from an actual mental health professional. So it's such an important part that we've been missing this whole time, because it's 2 a.m, somebody's having a mental health crisis. Who are you going to call? The only person available at that time is the police. What we're trying to do, and what the city's really going towards, and what the city's pushing towards, and we even got a grant for it, is this co-responder model with mental health professionals. I just saw ours today. She's out working with an officer doing a bunch of follow-up work. So it's a really great service that's offered to Shoreline, and that we hope to continue to offer with more mental health professionals the more we get hired, and we're working really hard to get them hired. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to talk fast. So that is a great program. It's amazing. It's probably one of my favorite parts to things to look forward to with the police is the co-responder model. And it started up here in Shoreline with Chief Ledford, with Captain Strathy, who is now retired, and it just continues to grow, and it's an amazing program for everybody. Oh, look at that. Ha! Allegra, you see that? Questions. And I know there's a bunch, so if I have to
I
answer.
know, well done. Sorry, I lost track of how many slides. And thanks to Rick, who was addressing some questions in the chat as well.
Well, thanks, Rick.
I want to check, Joseph, you were on a string with questions for Rick. Was there anything that you wanted to ask the chief that didn't get covered in Rick's responses?
No, Chief, thanks for your presentation. Largely my questions are answered, so thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right.
Allegra, can I just talk really
Yeah.
quick about the shoplifting? Because somebody had a really good question. It said, I understand
Yeah.
shoplifting is a serious problem for many stores and businesses, and what is being done to reduce the problem in Shoreline? And I would 100% agree with you that shoplifting is a serious problem all over, not just in Shoreline. What we're running up against is a lot of the stores and businesses have decided to take 100% hands-off approach, and they're saying we're just going to refer it to our insurance and allow them to pay us back for the items that were stolen. And I'll tell you what is one of the most frustrating things when I was working over at Costco the other day, and I watched somebody walk out with a large drill set at Home Depot, probably $1,000 drill set. So I ran over there really quick with my car, and I tried to ask them what they wanted to do. And they said, it's okay, we're going to just file it with our loss prevention, which is completely different than anything I'm used to, because this would be something I would arrest somebody on and want to put them in jail. I mean, obviously they're stealing $1,000 worth of pretty expensive equipment. But if we don't have support from those stores, if those stores don't want to assist in prosecution, we can't make an arrest. We can't even make a stop for that matter. So we watch that a lot, and a lot of people hesitate to call the police at all. We still have a lot of stores that are great that will call us. Just over at the Safeway, $2 candy bar. Our officers went over, found the guy, actually made an arrest on it. Come to find out he had a loaded firearm in his front pockets that was stolen, and he was a convicted felon. So he got booked on several felonies. And this was just a basic contact that we were having. So thankfully something worse didn't happen, but just shows that just because it's a basic shoplifting, it could lead into a lot more. And hopefully I answered your question.
I also had there was a question about, their challenges with the recruiting and what, is there anything specific that King County is doing to try to recruit?
Yes.
others?
Yeah, we got a great recruiting team now. Since we have our new interim sheriff, Patty Coltendall, she has put recruiting kind of at the top because it's so important. And so we've got a recruiting team. They're actually in Reno right now. We've got several lateral officers that we're trying to bring to the sheriff's office to be part of our team. And then once we get them hired on, we're training a ton in Shoreline as well. We've got, I think, 5 that are going through training right now. So once they're done, then they'll come out to the street with us once they finish their field training program. But so yes, we're doing a lot to get out and do recruiting. We have radio ads, we have TV stuff, we have going to a lot of different events. It has been very positive, and the news that we're getting from downtown is really great news. We've got a lot of good candidates coming forward, which is awesome. That is very happy news for us. We lost a lot of people in the vaccine mandate. And we had a lot of people that retired because they were going to get lost in the vaccine mandate. So that took a huge chunk of our really, I would say, very experienced officers off the street and away from our department to other departments that didn't require the vaccine. So.
All right, I have one more question in the chat, and then I'm gonna wrap this section up and we'll move to our representatives from planning and community development. But Lincoln was asking whether Shoreline has a correlation, as Seattle has discovered, of offenders who commit repeat crimes as misdemeanors.
Oh yeah, we talked about that the other day because somebody was asking about the same thing with we do not have those numbers like Seattle has, but that was something we were talking about putting together because I think it's Lincoln, you bring up a really good point because it definitely, I saw that in Seattle and it was really eye-opening to see something like that. Thankfully, we don't have that many repeat offenders to that level, but we do still have our repeat offenders. So that is something that we were talking about trying to put together and something that hopefully we can do in the future. I know other people probably have other questions. I don't know how you can get them to me, but please send them to me. I can give you my email if you want, and you can send them directly to me or whatever you guys have in mind. I don't care. I'm happy to help though, whatever I can. Thank you.
We can use Christina. I put Christina's email in the chat, and she'll collect questions as Rick has been doing for us. So, but I will also send an email out to the whole group with her email as well. So if you have further questions, feel free, and we'll just continue to add to that Q&A document that Rick has started so nicely.
Thank you all very much for having me tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Abbott, for spending your Thursday evening with us.
Of course.
All right. So I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Rachel, Andrew, Ray, and Jared.
Hi, good evening. We really appreciate this opportunity to share with the committee which services the Planning and Community Development Department provides to Shoreline residents. Again, I'm Rachel Markle, and I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. Our mission for this department is to ensure that the natural and built environments are healthy, safe, and reflect the community's vision. And you can go ahead and progress that if you would, Rick, or there we go. So, thank you, perfect. Here with me tonight, as they were introduced earlier, but I'll say it again. We have Jared Lewis, who is our Permit Services Manager, and Ray Allshouse, who is the Building Official, and Andrew Bauer, who is the City Planning Manager. We make up the supervisory team for Planning and Community Development. Each manager tonight will go through and provide you with more information about the specific work that we are proud to do here in Shoreline. In addition to these 3 service lines, PCD also Planning and Community Development also includes operation staff, 3 that are responsible for budgeting, data management, public records request, archiving of records, and reporting. And with that, turning it over, I believe, to Jared.
So PCD, or again, Planning and Community Development, to stay away from the acronyms, we provide a wide range of customer outreach and support. We tend to be the department that gets quite a few visitors in person, get quite a few phone calls, but we answer questions related to development and how to use property. We get that via in person, via the phone, via email. We also offer lots of other different services. We usually annually, pre-COVID and once COVID gets a little bit better are home improvement workshops, where we actually invite customers in a less formal format to interact with us. Some people are sometimes a little put off by the formality of code, so we try to offer a more informal workshop. Staff attend neighborhood meetings to discuss projects. Again, and dealing with customers, we meet with them in person, deal with them again over the phone, via email. We respond to their concerns. Staff actually goes out and visits project sites, and you'll hear a little bit about that when we get to the building official. And again, we also hold large meetings for large, big projects. So our department, has a big face and a big presence in the city of anything that's, sort of related to development and land use activity. Next slide. So the group that I manage is the permit services group. And so our group is really the face of the first point of contact for any customer coming in person. And that group that I manage includes an admin assistant, three full-time permit techs, 2 part-time permit techs. And my group tends to be, again, the first face. If someone walks in the door, that's who you're going to see. You're going to see my group. And we're that first point of contact to help people sort of sit down and see, what the process is, get them to the correct person. So my group takes in permits. So we take in a permit application if you want to build something, if you want to build an addition on your house, if you want it to work actually in the street, if a developer wants to build a 300-unit apartment building, that all comes in for us to take in and start the overall process of review. So that's permit intake. We then route it to reviewers so that they can make sure that it meets the regulatory framework, that next step down of development code and construction code. We will go back and forth with the customer to make sure that it does meet code. We'll issue a comment letter. Again, meet with them in person, again, if they need further support. Then when the review is done, we actually issue the permit. And the permit gets issued, and again, further steps are inspection, and that'll be a little bit more with Ray Al's house after me. Next slide. So just to give a snapshot of sort of the volume that we deal with, and our volume continues to go up year to year. But last year, we actually took in 380 building permits. Now that could be anything from a very small addition to a house to a 500-unit apartment building. That could be something as small as a deck, but again, 380 building permits, 923 mechanical plumbing permits. So that's if you wanted to move or add a toilet to your house, if you wanted to redo your kitchen with just the mechanical and plumbing and no walls. So we had 923 of those. We had quite a few of those. Obviously, I think that's our biggest number of the group there. 219 fire system permits. We coordinate directly with the fire department, which is a separate agency, but we take in their building permits, their fire permits, we route them to them, they approve them, and then it comes back to us and we issue them. They do their own inspections, but we contract with them to do fire system permits. That's if you want to add a sprinkler system to a house or a commercial building, if you want to add a fire alarm system. We also do land use permits, and that's where there is authorization to do something with your land, not necessarily construct something, but if you want to, let's say, subdivide your land from 1 lot into 3 lots, or if you wanted to actually aggregate your land to do a bigger development from, let's say, someone has 4 lots and they need a big lot to do something big, that would be a lot consolidation. So that's a type of land use permit. Again, I mentioned earlier, right-of-way use permits. If someone wants to work in the city street, that does require a permit. If they want to actually work in the street, if they want to put something in the street, those all require permits. We assumed the wastewater district. So Ronald Wastewater District is no more. The city assumed a Ronald Wastewater District. And so now we do wastewater permits. So if someone wants to cap off their sewer line, if someone wants to repair their sewer line, someone wants to do a new connection to a new building, that's a permit. And then we also do pre-application meetings. That's where for bigger developments, if the customer wants to come in and formally meet with the city, to discuss the project. We had 126 of those last year. And so total of our using our permit tracking system, which we can track every application we take in, last year we took in 3,040 applications. So quite a bit of volume. And then next slide. And so we also have a permit search tool so that customers and citizens or residents and anyone from outside can look and see those 3,040 permits. They can go to our website and search and see, you know, those 3,000 permits. They can search by address, they can search by type. So that tool, if you want to go back and look at it later, you can play around with it. You can cut and dice and search all sorts of different topics to see those 3,040 permits last year. And I think we're so far this year, I want to say we're in the 800s already. So yeah, so that is the permit search tool. And next slide, I'll turn it over to Ray.
Okay, I'm Ray Allshouse, the building official, and all those things that Jared's team does, my folks provide the technical building expertise to do plan reviews and inspections in the field for all development that occurs other than in the right-of-way. So that includes all the private property. It also does include city projects that are not in the right-of-way. And the basis, in fact, I think, Rick, did you skip a slide? No, you're good. Okay. All right. And the basis that we use for the foundation of this technical expertise is actually based on model codes, which are developed at the national level. And it's through these organizations, the International Code Council, you hear the term I-codes, they are used across the country. And in one of the major backups for that, particularly in the arena of fire protection, is the National Fire Protection Association. So they have a number of standards that apply. And then within the state, since my inspectors also look at the drainage improvements, the state ecology manual is the primary driver there. And then we've got have local amendments through our development code, which we execute the bulk of the inspections, but when we get into planning, because our current planning folks actually are involved in the review of the development portion of our projects as it relates to the zoning code. And I'll leave that to Andrew. But the key thing that I want to mention here, let's go to the next slide. This gives you a sense of the bulk of the number of permits and their valuation. The valuation is important because when it comes to sustainability, financial sustainability, we actually base our user fees, which basically cover pretty much all the direct costs for my staff, is based on a national standard, which we've used for years for establishing fees for building permits, which are based on valuation. And the only exception to that national level is we, a number of years ago, made adjustments at the local level because we felt that the smaller projects needed to bear a larger percentage of the burden to process those smaller permits, but because by and large, the larger permits based on valuation do end up supporting the smaller projects as an internal subsidy. And that's with good reason. And like I said, we're following a national model on doing that. But anyway, so this gives you an idea through the different types of projects, commercial projects, single family, multifamily, mixed use, and the idea of the numbers of projects. So that's where, as Jared had pointed out, the permits could be any number of projects, but a larger apartment building that's 340 units, that's one permit, as opposed to a single family house, which would be one permit. So that's why this puts it in context to give you an idea that for those relative numbers, what the valuation Yes. Currently, our inspections are formed, or as you can see, are just under 4,700 for 2021. That is growing because the development that many of you are aware of in response to the rezoning that the council approved over the past years, the development community is responding strongly around the light rail stations, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this, these kind of numbers. And because we're based on user fees, which are those building permit fees, then it grows with one. As the development workload increases, then we get more money, so then we can buy the necessary resources to review and process these permits. So, and like I said, those are user fees. Next slide.
Back to me. So I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the community part of planning and community development. And a lot of that starts with Vision 2029. And I'm not sure if in your first meeting, maybe you already talked about this a little bit, but it's a great document and can be talked about more than once for sure. So the Vision 2029 was drafted in 2008 and 2009, and it represents the input of over 200 commenters, providing us with 2,500 comments. And before I came here tonight, I was thinking of telling you about the community member that spent a lot of time, I think, the primary author of Vision 2029, and she's one of your members of your committee, Robin McClellan. That's how I remember it. It was a long time ago, but I distinctly remember Robin saying, you know, it's just too wonky the way it is, something to that effect. It's too bureaucratic. I want to take it back to my house and I want to wordsmith it. And she worked really, really hard on it, as I remember. And that's the document we have now. And I think she used the comments that were provided as inspiration for the document. And I don't know, I'll just go ahead and say it. Thank you, Robin, for all your work on the vision. We go back to it constantly. And just to let everybody know, you know, we're about to go through a major update of the comprehensive plan, and City Council was asked, hey, do we need to do a whole new visioning process? You know, 2029 is going to come pretty soon. And, you know, we did this in 2008. And their take on it, and guidance just was, no, they didn't feel like we needed to do as big an outreach as we did in the beginning, or that it probably would result in a lot of changes. Of course, we're going to ask people, is there anything missing? Should we change anything when we go back out? But a lot of it, it still stands true in their minds as how they want to see the city advance. So the purpose of the vision is it has provided city leaders, residents, volunteers, residents current and future too, investors and staff with a picture of what the future is we're all trying to work towards. The vision highlights, if you've had a chance to read it, it has highlights about a desire to continue and build upon a city of neighborhoods, a city with neighborhood centers, to build upon the work that's already gone forward with the Aurora Avenue, making it really a signature boulevard. We had all those improvements put in, kind of the structural improvements to make it a signature boulevard, but to continue to have redevelopment happen there that would also make it, you know, a town center along Aurora Avenue and things of that nature. And also to have a healthy community and a community that is looking out for future generations to make things even and better for the next. So the vision really provides clear direction for future policies, goals, and decisions. And the vision does that very nicely through 18 framework goals, which make up the first part of the city's comprehensive plan. So I think I'm ready for the next slide, Rick. So the framework goals, like I said, are part of the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan also includes policies and goals for land use, community design, housing, transportation, economic development, the natural environment, which would also be the sustainability goals, parks, recreation, and open space. They have their own much more detailed plan, but we have kind of overarching policies and goals in the comprehensive plan. Capital facilities are laid out in the comprehensive plan, utilities, and also the Shoreline Master Program, which are the local regulations to manage any type of development and not development, but goals for protecting shorelines, shoreline along with the Puget Sound. And the reason these are the selected chapters is the idea is that kind of looking at the community as a whole and making sure it all aligns and is working together to get you to that vision that that we find in Vision 2029 and in the framework goals. I thought it might be helpful to kind of walk through how these documents in real time or in real life have worked, provide you an example. So Vision 2029 includes framework goal number 14, for example, and that goal is to designate specific areas for high density development, especially along major transit corridors. And then if we were to look in the comprehensive plan, you're going to find land use goals and policies. And there's a land use goal number 3 that borrows straight from the vision. It says create plans and strategies that implement the city's Vision 2029 and light rail station planning area goals for transit supportive development to occur within a half-mile radius of future light rail stations. This was a to-do. Then the council did it. The council then made a council goal, one of their annual goals, for staff to work with the Planning Commission to create specific plans for each of the station areas. These plans were adopted. These plans informed the rezone within a half-mile of each of the station. And then once they were adopted, the plan began to unfold. Housing began to come into each of the station areas. The light rail stations were started and the rail itself. So that kind of shows you how from a vision, you get to the Vision 2029, you get to the comprehensive plan and the goals and policies, and then council selects from there things that should move forward, and then they go to staff and the community to work on. And I believe we're going to hear some more about planning from Andrew now.
Yeah, thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to you a little more about what the planning team does and so basically, the planning team works on a daily basis with all of the policies and regulations that Rachel was just speaking to. And so one of the major tools to implement the policies related to development and land use is the development code, which establishes many of the specific regulations related to everything from allowable land uses in areas of the city, all the way to protection of environmental features like streams and wetlands and steep slopes and the shorelines. And then also how high and how intense a property can be developed as well. And then the Planning Commission, of course, plays a major role in setting the policies and the regulations. And so it consists of 7 members appointed by the council that review the topics dealing with land use and development, and they provide recommendations to council. So the planning team supports the Planning Commission and their work, and which this year, as Rachel alluded to, we're starting a lot of the preliminary work related to the major update of the comprehensive plan. So Vision 2029 will become Vision 2049, and looking 20 years beyond into the future and seeing, kind of setting the stage for what comes next. The Planning Commission is also, just to speak briefly to some of the other items on their plate for this coming year, They'll be reviewing permanent regulations dealing with outdoor seating, using the temporary regulations that were enacted by council during the pandemic as a starting point, kind of viewing that as a pilot program and building from there to create more flexibility for bars and restaurants and other businesses to utilize outdoor areas for their uses and for outdoor seating. They'll also be developing regulations for cottage housing, which is a form of middle housing that I'll speak to in a minute, but that was identified in the Housing Action Plan. Other items on the Commission's work plan this year include a transfer of development rights program, and that's the idea where rural or farmland areas are preserved by transferring those development rights away from those and into more urban areas like Shoreline, where there's existing infrastructure and amenities and roads and everything. So we're preserving rural areas and allowing more development in urban areas. And then also they'll be looking at refinements to the mixed use residential zones that are most closely surrounding the two future light rail station areas, and looking at ways, it's been 6 going on 7 years since those plans were adopted, believe it or not. And so we're looking at some refinements or some tune-ups in different areas to facilitate the type of growth that was envisioned in those sub-area plans when they were adopted 6 and 7 years ago. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the Housing Action Plan. So what is a Housing Action Plan exactly? So the council adopted one in May of last year, actually, and it's essentially a roadmap to address housing needs in Shoreline based on the current and projected population for the city. Housing has been, as you all know, a huge issue for the entire region, and this action plan will hopefully help set the framework and identify strategies to address those housing needs. It's broken into 3 different components. The housing needs assessment looks at housing data and identifies different needs specific to Shoreline, including the different types of housing, different prices, and the levels of income that one or a family would need to afford those housing types. And then it also includes a regulatory review. So looking at existing goals and policies and the regulatory tools already in place that address housing. And then last, it includes a toolkit of strategies and potential actions to address the specific needs that were identified in the needs assessment. Next slide, please. There were about 25 different strategies identified in the Housing Action Plan, and the Planning Commission reviewed these strategies and developed a list of 7 high implementation priorities. And the council supported these different priorities as they were reviewing and approving the action plan. And during that approval process, council identified cottage housing as their top priority, which we're launching into this year actually to start to develop rules and regulations that would allow cottage housing, and we'll be starting a conversation with the community and seeing kind of where we would want to allow those types of houses and what they should look like and all that good stuff. Next slide. And then middle housing, as this graphic illustrates, refers to the range of housing types that are between kind of the mid-rise apartments and single family housing. So middle housing is essentially everything from a duplex or triplex all the way to townhomes and live work units. Cottage housing falls in there as a form of middle housing. So if you view housing as sort of a spectrum, this illustrates that. You've got kind of the more intense mid-rise on the right there, all the way down to your detached single family housing on the left. And then middle housing is essentially all these different housing types in the middle. And so many of the strategies and actions within the Housing Action Plan speak to middle housing. Next slide. And just to close out on the planning component here. So these are just some stats. I know Jared and Ray covered on a lot of these. You'll see again, just some numbers specific to the planning review piece of all of this. But as part of any building or development permit review, there's several reviews associated, and planning is one piece of that. So this is where a planner is making sure that a land use proposal or a permit application is meeting the city's adopted zoning regulations related to anything from the lot coverage to building height, property line setbacks, tree regulations, all the environmental regulations I mentioned earlier. So development and permit activity, as was mentioned, continues to be extremely busy, as you can see just by driving around town. And what's more though is, we're seeing a lot of activity, but the size and the scale and the complexity of these development applications have gone up significantly. There's a lot more complexity and time and effort that goes into reviewing an application for a 7-story building with ground floor commercial and apartments above. It just takes a different level of technical expertise. There's a lot more coordination amongst the different review groups internal to the city, coordinating with the structural plans review, with the building, all the way from planning with public works and the utilities. And then also a lot of coordination with outside agencies. We have a couple of developments going on and planned right adjacent to the light rail stations. And so it's a lot of coordination with our partners at Sound Transit, Seattle City Light on the utility side. So there's just a lot of coordination and complexity and time that goes into many of these larger developments. Next slide.
Okay, I'm going to jump back in, not because this is a building item. As Andrew mentioned, there are a number of programs that our department are involved in where we take the lead on a number, and there are others where we're just a strong participant. And that's why this one was placed here. You're probably well aware that the city has been actively involved with other jurisdictions, municipalities within King County. We're actually involved with at least 2 groups that are really concerned about greenhouse gas emissions. And as a result of that, we've got an ongoing climate action plan, which is actually led by another department within the city, but we play a significant role. And this slide has been placed in here sort of as representative because as Andrew mentioned, one of the ways that we can achieve the goals that council has established is to come up with legislation that regulates and requires people to do things. This is an example of a program which is actually a voluntary program. And it's interesting, historically, the building community, particularly the home builders, they tend to be very resistive of improvements in the energy code. And they get a little bit of a bum rap because they know that energy efficient buildings that the public wants them. And here's an example. So the master builders of King and Snohomish counties has set up this program, this Built Green program. And this Built Green, it's got 3 levels. And the 4-star program is when you compare it to the regulated requirement, i.e. the Washington State Energy Code that applies to new single family construction, it establishes certain minimums. And what this program does, which like I said, was set up by the building industry, is to establish 3 levels of, let's beat that code. And this middle level, the Green Star program beats the code by about 20% in energy efficiency. There's other aspects of it, but that's the key piece of it and that sets it apart from the other. And what we're showing here is that within Shoreline, 700 units, and this is since inception of the program, but it's a significant number of, in other words, our citizens who stepped up and said voluntarily, I want that more energy efficient component in my house. And as an example, just to give you a flavor of the sorts of things that it involves, it says builders can gain points because that's how they achieve this 4-star program by installing more efficient water heaters or installing water heater inside a conditioned space, to minimize the amount of energy necessary to warm up the water, using light-colored interior finishes, energy-efficient lighting, using Energy Star appliances of various types, and it's been a very successful program. And I do appreciate, we did get a comment that, these statistics, they're trying to give a flavor. Okay, I say, all right, it's a 20% reduction over what of energy consumption based on what the state regulated energy code is. And this was trying to put it in something, make it a little more understandable to the public as to, okay, well, what are the savings? But we'll acknowledge they made a mistake on the light bulbs, the LED light bulbs. And one of you was very sharp and pointed that out, and you're correct. And we have not updated that number, but we'll get that back to the folks that, hey, let's, you want to present the good news, but you don't want to throw it out of whack. So, but anyway, that's an example of how a council goal and both has a regulatory element as well as a voluntary element that is successful in the city of Shoreline. Next slide.
Ray, you've gone on mute there.
I got muted. You can see the years and how that climbed, and that's how we got up to 700. And then just shows in comparison to other jurisdictions that Shoreline's jumping on the bandwagon, and it's rather clear that our citizens are serious on this matter, and that the council is following through they've adopted on the commercial side, because by state law we cannot change the residential code, but we have the authority to make changes to the commercial code, which includes apartment buildings above 4 stories. And council has moved to do that. And we've adopted almost identical regulations for energy that the city of Seattle has that will actually be going into effect on the 1st of July of this year. Next slide.
All right. So I'm just kind of doing a time check, because I know that because we have a session that will be starting again at 8, and I heard that some people do have other commitments at 8. What I might do is propose, if there are any questions, we can take those now for planning and community development. Nate is going to try to wrap up his material in about 20 minutes, which would take us up to 8. So if people want to stretch, feel free to turn off camera. If you need to, use the restroom, do that. For those of you that are going to stay for the 8 to 8:30 session, we'll take a 5-minute break right at 8. So you can know that break is coming. But just given that Nate is here on a Thursday night and has prepared, I don't want to deprive him too much of his time slot, if that's okay. But did want to see if I didn't see any questions come through in the chat for planning and development other than the tree permit one that went through earlier. Was there anything else anyone wanted to clarify?
I would sort of like to get an idea, given the fact that the trend lines on your permits have gone up significantly in the last 3 years, what for this period of the proposed levy lift, has any planning been given or projections in terms of what you think your permit, activity, is this pace going to continue? Do you think that there's a significant increase in assessed valuation that's going to, be installed in the city?
Sure, I'd love to answer that question. We do expect this trend to continue. And Nate will give you, I'm guessing, a picture of what we've already got in the pipeline. Are you going to share that, Nate? Okay, so he'll share. We've got a lot in the pipeline and how far kind of the known aspects are of projects. But beyond that, we also have a growth target that is allocated to us. And that is, the King County is expecting 380,000 plus new residents in the next, 25 years. And we have our own allocation for that, which is about a little over 13,000 new homes or residence units would need to be built to accommodate our portion of that. So that will keep us busy. And all indications are that people will come and they will need places to live. And then also we're going to start trying, well, not that we're not trying already, but we also have 10,000 jobs allocated to us, which would mean commercial development should also pick up. The more people you have here, the more people there are to use the commercial services. So at some point, we're going to have enough people to support more commercial. So we also see that extending the need for our services to increase and our permitting numbers also to go up and revenue. Does that
Rachel,
help
could you
answer your
just,
question?
there was just a request to repeat the number for Shoreline growth.
Oh, Shoreline's allocation is 13,300 new units, and let me take a quick peek, 10,000 jobs.
I'm sorry, was that units or people?
Units, so more people.
So the 380,000 people that are projected to move into King County?
I'm sorry, that's units as well. That's
units of housing.
Yes.
Got it.
I will double check that, but that's
okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify, is that saying that the city of Shoreline is looking to onboard 10,000 new jobs, or is that King County specifically?
This is for Shoreline. The county has 311,000 new jobs coming to the county.
Over a 25-year period?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're going to hear a little bit more on the sort of future look from Nate, but thank you again to Rachel, Ray, Andrew, and Jared. Really helpful to have you, and I know that people engage with the material ahead of time and will send any additional questions on via Christina, so thanks so much for the presentation tonight.
Thank you all for your attention and having us to your committee. Thanks.
All right, Nate, well, you're our closer for this evening.
Tough act to follow. I hope you all forget the nice things Rick said at the outset about how good this presentation was. I don't know where he got that idea because he's actually seen this and knows how I operate. So I think he's just trying to leave with a lot of goodwill as he steps out the door on his way out of town. And you've seen these slides. I believe they were shared with you in advance, and there were a couple of questions which I will respond to, and I will not belabor the details in the majority of these slides. Probably this first third, I'm just going to kind of blaze through, but you've already heard about the comp plan. It does have an economic development element. One of my favorite highlights here is back in 2012, one of our goals was to have multi-story buildings. That's about as far as we got into the details on that. And now we're seeing a lot of multi-story buildings, which is fantastic. And we have the opportunity, I think, to look ahead and maybe be a little more creative about what we want the buildings to have in them or what types of buildings we would want. From the comp plan, we get which is a 10-year period. The economic development strategic plan takes that economic development element and breaks it into 5-year chunks. And so right now we're in this 2018 to 2023 phase of the big priorities set by the council, these big four: strengthening Shoreline Signature Boulevard, catalyze Shoreline Place, unlock the Fircrest property, surplus land, was considered underutilized land there, station area growth, and more. And there's a lot of other areas of the city and areas within all across the city where we see opportunities for economic growth. Breaking it down further, more granular, is at an annual level. These are biannual or biennial council goals and action steps. And there's that goal number 1 related to the economic climate and opportunities. And so these are those action steps that really seek to encourage economic growth and foster health of the business community and the economic well-being of the community. Just going to go again real quickly through some of the highlights in terms of some of the things we do with some of these economic development priorities. And obviously, every community has had a significant emphasis on business support, and we dove right in at a very early stage when it was clear, all the experts were saying how hard hit local small business, and just small business being the backbone of our economy, and how hard hit we would expect them to be from this pandemic. And so there are a number of steps that were taken by an interdepartmental team to address and try to soften the impact and support business. And a lot of that is ongoing, and some new chapters of pretty significant work in that area of working with our business community is growing. And I think it's a wonderful development and maturation of our city in terms of supporting small business as the core of our economic development strategy. We've also really had an emphasis on the media production industry. You may not be surprised, but maybe outside Shoreline, folks are surprised to learn that we've had 4 feature-length films shot in one single year just prior to the pandemic. And that really was a high water mark, but it was a sign of many years of work to really capture the value of having one of the region's premier film schools in the Shoreline Community College film program, which has great connections to the industry, and as a result, lots of great industry opportunity here for their students, our residents, our businesses, et cetera. And this is just one snapshot, one example, one film shot that year, that 2019 year, $1 million production, just very scrappy, local. In fact, the director is a Richmond Beach resident, Bao Tran. It's just a really fun film, fun project, and something we can all be very proud of because it's got great reviews. And it also brought $100,000 to local businesses spending while they were in town for those 3 months. So back to those big priorities in the economic development strategic plan, station area growth, one that we see a lot coming our way, as Rachel mentioned. I'll talk a little bit about the numbers there, and also just one that we get lots of questions about. Now starting to have more answers to those questions. I've been in this role for almost 4 years, and the first few years were much more questions, and now we're starting to see real proposals. But starting with the townhome policy change, hundreds of units came to town in the station areas. And so obviously everyone has seen a lot of that development. But now we're going from the hundreds to the thousands of units in terms of what we're seeing coming our way in those station areas. And again, station areas, 7% of the city's land, envisioned by our council and by the community to more than double the population on that 7% of the land. So really envisioned as these new urban centers, and return that investment, a really significant ROI on this major infrastructure that the region is building in town. So I'm going to talk more about these, but nearly 3,000 units in just the station areas. And these are just kind of the short list and just the biggest projects. I have a bigger spreadsheet that is tracking more of the bigger projects kind of throughout the city. And the total is around 12,000 units when you factor in some of the really longer range stuff that may take a decade or more. But just to give you a perspective of where we're going and what we're seeing. One example, again, just kind of a snapshot project right next to the 148th Street station. This has a ground floor commercial space and is truly transit-oriented development, but it'll add 252 units right there next to the station. And they will be getting their permits, I think, kind of any day now, and we're working to try to get those out the door and allow them to begin their construction. Another area of the city, again, that's the strengthening the Signature Boulevard. We are seeing, around 1,700 units in this area, just up and down that corridor with that zoning that allows for up to 7 stories, that MB zoning. And this is one pretty large scale example of that. That's across the street from the Sky Nursery. And this is the Shea Properties project, Canopy Phase 1 and Canopy Phase 2. Under construction now, nearly 500 units and participating in the MFTE program. So dedicating units to affordable housing during that exemption period. as are pretty much all of the multifamily projects. Also in the community renewal area, a lot to look forward to there in terms of investment. The former Sears property in the ownership of Merlot and Geyer Partners, so 25% of this 70-acre community renewal area, and they are very eager to get permits on their phase 1, which is the 16,000 square feet of retail planned at the corner of 155th and Westminster Way. And then the mixed use phases that will follow the project, follow throughout the project, will add up to around 1,400 units in these multiple buildings and new tree-lined streets and parks and plazas and things that, and investments out into 160th and Westminster Way. A lot of costs in public and private, investment, and that really require kind of the highest level of rent, which until very recently, I think with this project and some of the others, this one is the current, which is across the street from there, leasing up at an extremely rapid pace, and I think at higher rents than were anticipated. And that has been the key, I think, for that Shoreline Place project to be able to start to get some forward momentum, is being able to prove to the market that their theory that this is a luxury housing market is starting to bear true with some of the projects that are happening. So looking back at the key performance indicators, these are the data points that we track to report to council on an annual basis for their goal setting workshop. How are we doing against those goals related to our economic well-being? And so I'm going to talk through a little bit about each of these. But first, before I dive into them, I do want to acknowledge the question about kind of forward-looking and creating a forecast for these figures or for some of this data point. We don't have the real solid ability to do that. Small but mighty Shoreline analytical team and resources. And I think also there's just an acknowledgement that if you base some of your finances around projections, even if you're assuming things kind of continue to go the way that they've been going, it's very challenging to do and can be very risky in terms of how you structure your finances. And so I wish that I could give you a crystal ball. There are some of these that I think are better than others as sort of a looking at the past to be able to determine where we're going in the future. And I will try to move as expeditiously through as we look at these. But starting with the annual growth of assessed property from new construction. And so this is, again, just as it indicates, this is tracking the overall assessed value of the city. So all of the buildings in the city totals up into some billions of dollars of value assessed by the King County assessor. How much of that is due to new construction coming on and adding to that overall value, and how much of that is, appreciation or what have you. And you can see that we're kind of bumping along, above or below 1% most years, and kind of a high water mark of 1.36 in 2019. And it's kind of a little bit up and down. Similarly, the percent of assessed property value that is commercial, it's gone up and down, but as you can kind of see, mostly down. And I believe the big drop here was when the Sears property was maybe taken off the rolls. But I don't have a solid answer for that change. I do think that is something we can anticipate seeing go up, as Rachel had said before, with increased density, adding enough customer base to start to support the retail that we do have. We'll start to get, I think, to a point where we'll see that increase, and with increased demand moving in. But people still will shop local, as I like to say, on Amazon, our big local store, and that will still continue to challenge commercial in any city to be successful in terms of new space. We do see an increase in licensed businesses, and a growth there is a very positive sign for our city, and that is a pretty steady trend line. So that's one that I would hope we would continue to see. going forward, and that we retain, maybe more importantly, those as many as those businesses that we do have. So this is another trend line that I think is interesting to look at and think about for the future. And this is just number of housing units. And as I mentioned before, thousands of new units in our pipeline. And those are almost exclusively, or those that I'm tracking are exclusively multifamily. And so again, watching what happens with the economy and interest rates, whether our friends at King County can start their own concrete company and get the concrete flowing again. We'll see, if this sort of trend line is one that continues. But one thing that's been interesting to watch is how that last one relates to this one, the retail sales tax per capita. This is an increase in not just sales taxes that are coming into the city, but per person, we're getting more from our residents. And so that may be more spending, but it also, we know it has an influence from the construction sales tax. And so a construction project pays, the city's share of that is, Rick will correct me when I say this wrong, but the city's share of the sales tax on the total value of a construction project, they paid 10.2%, I think, right, as what everyone else does. I think the city's share of that is 1.05%. Again, Rick.
That's correct.
Yes. And so that's included in here. And so as you saw before, more housing units are coming in, and that is construction. And so there's sales tax on construction. And so that's influencing it. But I also do think there is something to be said for the innovation economy and the workers of the innovation economy moving to this region, and we are building homes for them, and other parts of the region are not. And so there are people who are well paid, and we have seen our median renter income go up between the 2010 census and the 2020 census, went up by $10,000 or $11,000. So a 26% increase in the income of the renter, the median renter. And I don't have that in any of my slides, but I'm happy to share that data point or others. The vacancy and rental rates is another one that we track on an annual basis for Council of Commercial Properties. And this is one where I know, because I told the company that does this tracking that they didn't have Sears when Sears went out of business. And that, I think, 300,000 square feet wasn't calculated, and so this big jump in vacancy is when they did update that. But market rent is still continuing to go up. What we hear from the development market is those rents aren't high enough to build speculative space. The rents need to be much higher, so the lower quality, older space is almost paying new space prices. That's when there's enough of a space crunch that they'll take that chance of speculative development. This is the multifamily, kind of similar indicators there. And this is just showing, again, the vacancies go up and down. That's much more related to supply. So we find that in Shoreline, the vacancy rate goes up when there's a new building, and then it goes back down to below the Seattle vacancy rate when that building starts to fill up again. And so there's plenty of demand from what we've seen so far in Shoreline, and we do imagine that will continue. Again, the new product has a slightly higher rental rate per square foot than the older product. And but you can see the older product, those rents are also going up. And again, just nowhere in the region is anybody overbuilding. And we have seen continued increases in the homeless counts, I think, as a result. And it's a pretty straightforward supply and demand issue from what I read. Just real quickly, because I know we're running out of time, we have a lot of strengths. I think we all know them. And this is just a few of them. There are plenty more that are in that beautiful prose of Vision 2029 that Robin developed, but these are just a few that jump out and I think make sense for investors. There are also some challenges, and construction costs are high wherever you are, and in Shoreline the rent isn't necessarily as high as it is in other places where that construction cost is also high. And there's quite a bit of supply coming. And so is there saturation? And right now we're not seeing that. Right now we're seeing very fast lease up, and projects are very successful with the rent that they're collecting. This is one of those slides that brought up a question. And the question was, what is this? Very fair question. So this is, and also, yes, it's missing something, which is auto sales. So let's see, I think I already updated that to add that here, but a simplified version in sort of just the bigger categories is this one. So I'm going to talk about what this is. So surplus just means we have more than our fair share of that type of business. And a leakage means that's business we're losing to other cities. And so that's things we might already know, but food services, eating and drinking establishments, that's something we hear a lot. People would like to see more of in Shoreline. And this here, the data supports that. That's a leakage factor. We're not getting our fair share of retail sales taxes on that activity because people are leaving town for that. So these are some of the data that we sort of keep an eye on for where are our opportunities and what do we want to focus on. More of that type of data comes from our friends at the Shoreline Community College in their Workforce Advisory Council. These are the areas they're investing. These are the areas that they see the demand. And some of these have pretty high starting salaries or wages. And so this is just important for us to keep our eye on the ball of where the demand is today. And the Shoreline Community College is an incredible resource to us in that they're they're a national hub for biotechnology, biomanufacturing, which really promises to be a third co-equal leg of a stool of health that previously kind of had those two legs. And so we're in a good place in terms of recruitment of industry with them in our neighborhood. These are our existing incentives today, very focused on the built environment. I still think that is a primary opportunity for us. But as we think about the sources of revenue available to the city and how we can kind of turn those dials up or down. And I know you're all learning a lot about the property tax and kind of how that's a little bit more convoluted and limited than we might think, but there are these other sources where we may be able to juice our revenues a little bit, and it has to do with, I think recruiting, investment, and the built environment and change over time. And so these are some of the opportunity areas. The question was asked about the 185th station area. That is definitely a significant location for development. It does not have a freeway off-ramp. And so just the next station up to the north in Mount Lake Terrace does have a light rail station and a freeway off-ramp. And so for just a job creation, commercial or economic development that's non-residential, these other locations have other assets or amenities nearby. And I just call out those health kind of sectors and those infrastructure projects that I think are going to have a big influence on why these areas are potential opportunities for us. And just
Nate, I'm sorry, just
those.
to pause. I just wanted to give Rick, I do know that there's some people that need to leave, right at 8. So I wanted to just see if Rick had anything he needed to share with the full group. And then those that are staying for the longer session or can stay for a few more minutes can hear the end. But just in the event anyone has to drop off, Rick, is there anything you need to share with the full group before we wrap?
No, not at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Nate. I just wanted
No,
to.
that's okay. Yeah, and I'm sorry for the run-on presentation. But these are just, the last couple of slides here just kind of drill down a little bit more into these locations where, as we start to see this multifamily, mixed-use, walkable urban environment come into view, the opportunity really becomes much stronger for other types of development. And so office or commercial or life science or tech incubator, those sorts of uses that are going to bring workers into the city who aren't necessarily going to add to the population and that trigger of that 1,000 per officer, or parks and recreation, or some of those other services that residents really draw on, and more of that daytime population for our businesses who are paying rent 7 days a week. But if everybody's commuting and not home 5 of those days, and their businesses aren't getting that support, we've seen a lot of those kind of revolving door locations in our town, where maybe just having more density, more population during the day could help. And there's certainly plenty of revenue dollars and resources that we can expect to come from other types of development that those builders for those sectors really are competing for that a sort of Class A space, and new construction is really going to those tenants that are looking for these really ideal urban walkable environments that their workers want to be in, and office parks in kind of a suburban setting are not really happening anymore. And so that conversion of this into this urban walkable environment, as Rachel had said before, I think is really going to lead towards opportunities for commercial that will support that and also be supported by it. These are just, again, kind of at a very high level, some of the areas around the 148th Street light rail station where commercial might really make sense, just given that access from the freeway and the station itself, visibility from the freeway. And then of course, Fircrest, and that's one that's very explicit in the economic development strategy as really looking at as a place for living wage jobs. And it has a lot of benefits in terms of DNR has it charged, their whole purpose and mission is twofold, conservation and resource lands, and maximizing the return on, to the taxpayers on publicly held lands. And so in an urban setting like this is not logging. In an urban setting like this, it's commercial use, and that's either through a long-term ground lease or sale, primarily. And that's the way that DNR tends to operate. And so there are lots of other ideas, and even our own plan talks about housing. The city's comp plan and the pros plan talks about parks, but there's a lot of land. There's dozens of acres of underutilized land at Fircrest, and so I hesitate to say it could be all things to all people, but it almost kind of can when you're talking about that much kind of excess capacity. The other benefit is DSHS and their underutilized land that they own and control currently has our off-leash area located on it, and that's they're showing in their early kind of design concepts what some kind of commercial development could look like on that portion to the east of the health lab, because they now recently were given that charge by the state legislature that they have a mandate to make the most economically from their own underutilized lands, and so that's an opportunity as well. And finally, the fact that the health lab is based here creates, I think, some really interesting possible cross-pollination opportunities in terms of innovation or that sort of health cluster possibility. The film industry remains very interested in this area, and Shoreline, obviously lots of films and film work happening here, and that particular location has been bandied about in the past as being very accessible, but it's just enough removed off of main streets that would offer that quiet that a movie kind of soundstage would need. And that is it. So I went a few minutes over my target, and I know I went through all of that really fast. So I appreciate you all bearing with me, and I really appreciate having the chance to share what we have going on and what some of the opportunities are.
Thanks, Nate, and appreciate that as the last person on the agenda, your time did get compressed. I understand that. Does anyone have any questions at this time? I know some of you had sent some questions ahead to Nate. Was there anything else anyone wants to clarify while he's here on the line?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think Nate said, and I think that we got this in an email, that some of these slides were sent to us ahead today, but I if I got them, I don't know where they are. So maybe you did send them, but I didn't see them. But there were a couple of slides of Nate's that I would like to have 15 minutes with, but I know we're not doing that tonight. But could we be assured that we have received those slides? The one that caught my attention that I think needs a lot of discussion is that leakage thing, where what we don't have and what we do have. And I think that deserves a lot more discussion in terms of how we get what we don't have, blah, blah, blah. But Allegra or Rick, whoever was sending the slides, if they were sent, I have to be told.
Robin, and the address that's being used for you is robinsink@comcast.net. Is that? Yeah.
I've gotten the emails.
Okay.
And I got the, I downloaded the, that long question and answer thing today, but I looked for the slides more than once and I didn't know how to, I didn't think I had them.
It was sent last
We'll also
Friday. Yeah.
And we'll make sure that the slide decks are posted on the website for this committee. So they'll always be able to be accessible from the website. But we can try to send the email again. I see that Linda had mentioned that Sharon had sent the email out and that it had gone to her junk folder. So that might be something to check.
Thank you, because this was so informative tonight and we almost needed 3 hours. I mean,
yeah,
everything we learned was important to know. And I hated for anybody to be rushed.
Yeah. Yeah, appreciate that. And I'll talk to Sarah and Rick too about how do we address, I mean, I agree that the leakage topic is really fascinating and interesting. And it's a little tangential actually for the levy lid lift question that we've been charged with discussing. So I want to make sure that we have enough discussion as a committee to talk about, what is it that the levy lid lift is funding? Does this group recommend that we would,
the issue there is sales tax revenue, basically, 10.03%. And so it is appropriate for the levy lift.
Yeah. All right. So I think we will be now sort of officially ending the full meeting. And for those that want to stay and talk to Rick largely about the model, we will be stopping this recording and then starting a new recording. I'm going to just wait and see how many people we have and see if that group wants to take like 4 minutes to just kind of walk away from the computer or if we want to keep rolling on. So thanks for those joining, and then I'll just give it a minute and see who's here for the second part.